The morning did not arrive with a trumpet or a drumbeat. It did not announce itself with the kind of urgency that history books prefer. Instead, it came quietly, the way it almost always did in America, through pale light slipping between curtains, through the soft hum of refrigerators, through the distant sound of a train horn that most people no longer consciously noticed. In a small town somewhere between the coasts, the first sign of the day was the same as it had been for decades, a bakery turning on its lights. Inside, an older man tied his apron with hands that had repeated the same motion for 40 years. The ovens warmed slowly. Dough rested on wooden tables. There was no sense that anything important was happening, yet this simple routine had been performed every morning across thousands of towns, across millions of days, quietly forming the backbone of the nation's life. Across the street, a newspaper delivery truck rolled by, leaving folded bundles on porches that still believed in printed news. Some papers would be read over coffee, others would remain untouched, later used to wrap dishes or line recycling bins. The headlines spoke of politics, markets, distant conflicts, and grand decisions, but for most readers, these were background sounds, faint echoes behind the real story of their own day: commuting, cooking, working, resting, repeating. In a suburban neighborhood, alarm clocks began ringing in different houses at slightly different times. A teacher silenced hers with practiced irritation. A construction worker hit snooze twice. A teenager ignored it entirely until a parent knocked on the door. The same rituals unfolded as they had for generations: brushing teeth, choosing clothes, checking phones, glancing at the weather. None of it felt historical, none of it felt permanent. Yet these tiny acts were the true substance of American time. The streets filled slowly. Cars moved out of driveways like a gentle current. Traffic lights blinked awake. Coffee shops unlocked their doors. The first customers entered not with excitement, but with routine, ordering the same drinks they had ordered yesterday and the day before that. The barista remembered their names, not because it was remarkable, but because repetition made memory easy. In the city, skyscrapers reflected the early light, their windows revealing thousands of small lives beginning in parallel. Elevators carried people upward and downward in silence, each passenger wrapped in private thoughts. Some listened to music, some scrolled through news feeds, some simply stared at the numbers changing on the digital display. The nation moved vertically and horizontally, not as a unified force, but as millions of separate bodies following invisible schedules. What made this awakening unique was not any specific event, but the absence of spectacle. No one declared the morning important. No one marked it in official records. Yet this was how America truly lived, not in moments of crises, but in endless sequences of ordinary mornings that blended together into a single long experience of continuity. History often describes nations through disruption, wars, elections, revolutions, disasters, but most of American life unfolded far from those dramatic peaks. It existed in offices where fluorescent lights flickered on, in classrooms where teachers wrote the date on whiteboards, in factories where machines began their daily rhythm. The country did not wake up to change, it woke up to familiarity. In a rural area, a farmer stepped outside before sunrise. The air was cold, the fields silent except for insects and distant birds. He checked the sky, not for political signs or economic trends, but for weather. Rain mattered more than headlines. Soil conditions mattered more than speeches. His day would be measured in tasks: feeding animals, checking equipment, walking the same paths his parents and grandparents had walked before him. Somewhere else, a nurse finished a night shift and drove home as others were just starting theirs. The hospital never slept. Neither did the highways, the internet, or the power grid. America functioned as a machine that had learned to keep itself moving through layers of overlapping routines. While one half rested, the other worked. While one region slept, another produced, shipped, or served. The nation's rhythm was not synchronized, but staggered, time zones creating a rolling wave of consciousness from east to west. When the sun rose over the Atlantic coast, it was still dark in the Midwest. When California woke, New York was already deep into the afternoon. The country never fully slept, and it never fully woke either. It existed in a constant state of partial awareness. Children boarded school buses that followed routes unchanged for years. They sat in the same seats, talked about the same things, complained about the same subjects. Their lessons would include dates and presidents and wars, but their own lives felt disconnected from those stories. History was something that had already happened. The present felt neutral, temporary, almost invisible. Adults filled offices, warehouses, restaurants, and stores. They answered emails, stocked shelves, assembled products, taught lessons, wrote reports. Most of their work would leave no trace in historical records. No plaques would mark their contributions. Yet their collective labor maintained the invisible infrastructure that allowed the nation to function: food on shelves, electricity in sockets, data moving through cables. At lunch, people gathered in break rooms in cafeterias. Conversations drifted from sports to family to weekend plans. Occasionally, someone mentioned the news, but usually without depth or urgency. Events that would later be described as major moments passed through these spaces as vague topics competing with discussions about parking, deadlines, or lunch venues. Even the symbols of American power felt distant and abstract. Government buildings stood in specific cities, but most citizens encountered the state through forms, websites, tax notices, or identification cards. Authority existed more as paperwork than presence. The nation was experienced not as a dramatic entity, but as a system of processes: registrations, payments, appointments, confirmations. In the afternoon, fatigue spread quietly. Coffee cups refilled, screens blurred, bodies adjusted to chairs. Outside, traffic thickened again as school ended and shifts changed. The same roads that carried morning hope now carried evening exhaustion. The cycle reversed itself without ceremony. What made this slow awakening remarkable was how little it felt like history. No one said this is an era. No one recognized that they were living inside a long chapter that future generations would try to summarize. From within, the nation felt timeless, neither beginning nor ending, just continuing. In the evening, families gathered around dinner tables or couches. Streaming services replaced earlier generations' televisions, which had replaced radios, which had replaced storytelling and newspapers. The technology changed, but the posture remained. People sitting together or alone, consuming narratives to fill the space between work and sleep. The stories they watched were dramatic: crime, romance, apocalypse, heroism, but their own lives remained modest. Most Americans did not experience epic events. They experienced mild disappointments, small victories, gradual changes. Their identities formed not through historical turning points, but through repetition: waking up, going out, coming back, sleeping again. Night fell gently. Streetlights turned on. The noise softened. Some cities glowed with constant movement. Others faded into darkness. In bedrooms, people checked alarms, scrolled through their phones one last time, and turned off the lights. The day ended not with resolution, but with suspension. And then it began again. This was how the nation truly woke. Not through declarations, but through continuity. Not through transformation, but through persistence. The real story of America was not a sequence of extraordinary moments, but an accumulation of ordinary ones layered so thickly that they created the illusion of stability. Generations passed through this rhythm almost without noticing. Children became adults, adults became elderly. New technologies arrived quietly, blending into daily life until they felt inevitable. The world changed, but slowly enough that most people adopted without reflection. Even major shifts, industrialization, suburbanization, digitization, felt gradual from within. Factories replaced farms, offices replaced factories, screens replaced paper. Each transformation took decades, not days. Each felt natural, even when it redefined how people lived, worked, and thought. From the inside, the nation never felt like it was becoming anything. It simply felt like it was being itself over and over again. History happened in hindsight. In the present, there was only routine. And that was the quiet truth. America did not rise through constant drama. It rose through millions of mornings that looked almost identical to the ones before them, through people who did not feel like historical figures, performing actions that did not feel significant, inside days that did not feel memorable. Yet those mornings were the nation. Those routines were the structure. Those unnoticed hours were the real foundation of American time. The country did not wake up all at once. It never has. It wakes slowly, every day, in pieces, through coffee machines and alarm clocks, through highways and hospitals, through classrooms and kitchens, forming a civilization not of grand moments, but of endless, quiet continuity. The streets did not care about headlines. They did not pause for breaking news or shift direction because of a speech or an announcement. They existed in a separate rhythm, one that moved according to clocks, traffic lights, store hours, and human habits that had been repeated so many times they no longer required conscious thought. In the early morning, before most people were fully awake, the streets were already alive. Not loud, not dramatic, just active in a quiet and functional way. Delivery trucks arrived at grocery stores, unloading boxes of fruits, vegetables, bread, milk, and items whose labels would never be read. Workers in reflective vests swept sidewalks that would soon be covered again with footprints, dust, and leaves. The city was preparing itself, the way a stage is prepared before an audience arrives. Buses rolled along familiar routes, stopping at the same corners they had stopped at for years. The drivers knew the rhythm of the road so well that they no longer thought about it. Their hands turned the steering wheel automatically, their feet pressed pedals without reflection. The passengers boarded with expressions that were neither happy nor sad, just neutral, faces shaped by routine. Some people sat by the windows, staring out at storefronts that had not yet opened. Others stared at their phones, scrolling through messages, weather forecasts, reminders, and headlines that would soon be forgotten. The bus moved forward regardless of what anyone read. Its purpose was not to deliver information, but bodies. On the sidewalks, shop owners unlocked metal shutters and glass doors. A florist placed buckets of flowers outside, arranging colors and patterns learned through years of trial and error. A cafe turned on its lights, and the smell of coffee drifted into the air, unnoticed by most, but deeply embedded in the sensory memory of the neighborhood. Inside offices, security guards checked empty hallways. Elevators waited silently. Computers booted up. Air conditioning systems began their steady hum. None of this was newsworthy. No journalist wrote about it, no camera recorded it. Yet this was the machinery of daily civilization, the infrastructure of continuity. History books would later talk about economic trends, employment statistics, urban growth, and technological change. But on these streets, history did not appear as data. It appeared as repetition, as people walking the same paths, opening the same doors, performing the same gestures at the same times. A woman walked into a dry cleaner and handed over clothes she had worn only once. The worker behind the counter wrote her name on a tag and placed the garments on a rack among hundreds of others. Neither of them considered the meaning of this exchange. Yet, multiplied across millions of people, these small transactions created entire industries, supply chains, and economic systems. At a corner store, a man bought a newspaper and a bottle of water. He glanced at the front page, sighed, and folded it under his arm. The headlines spoke of conflict, political debates, financial uncertainty, but as he walked away, his attention returned to the sidewalk, to avoiding cracks, to adjusting his jacket, to reaching the bus stop on time. The streets absorbed everything. They absorbed ambition and disappointment, success and failure, boredom and hope. They carried people to job interviews and first dates, to hospitals and funerals, to schools and retirement homes. Yet, the streets themselves remained unchanged, silent witnesses to lives passing over them like shadows. In residential areas, parents walked children to school. Some held hands, some argued gently about forgotten homework. Some walked in silence, already thinking about work, bills, and schedules. The children would learn about historical events inside classrooms, but their own lives would be shaped more by these daily walks than by any textbook. Teachers arrived at schools carrying bags filled with papers and laptops. They unlocked classrooms, wrote the date on the board, and prepared lessons that had been revised slightly each year. Students entered, sat down, and waited. The structure of education felt permanent, even though its content slowly changed. Outside, the city continued to flow. Garbage trucks followed routes mapped years ago. Postal workers delivered letters and packages, many of which were advertisements, bills, or online orders. The physical movement of objects across space mirrored the movement of people, constant, organized, invisible. There were no parades on these streets, no crowds gathered to celebrate or protest, just individuals passing each other without interaction, occasionally making eye contact, occasionally offering a polite nod. Most encounters lasted less than a second and were forgotten immediately. At lunchtime, the streets filled again. Office workers walked to nearby restaurants, food trucks parked at predictable spots. Lines formed, moved, and disappeared. People ate quickly, checking phones, discussing weekend plans, complaining about work. No one felt like they were participating in history. They felt like they were killing time. Yet time was the real subject of these streets. Not dramatic time, not historical time, but everyday time. The kind measured in minutes, hours, shifts, and deadlines. This was the time that shaped bodies and minds, that created habits and expectations, that determined how people experienced existence. The afternoon passed with the same quiet persistence. Deliveries continued, appointments were kept or missed, meetings ended without resolution, decisions were postponed. Life moved forward not through breakthroughs, but through maintenance. In the late afternoon, school ended. Children poured onto sidewalks, louder than before, carrying backpacks that seemed heavier than their bodies. Parents waited in cars or at bus stops. The city briefly felt more alive, more chaotic, before settling back into its usual rhythm. Traffic increased, horns sounded, patience wore thin. People checked the time repeatedly, calculating how long it would take to reach home. Their attention narrowed to routes, shortcuts, and delays. The world became a series of obstacles to be navigated efficiently, and still, no headlines. The news spoke of events elsewhere, faraway crises, political struggles, global shifts. But on these streets, nothing exceptional happened. The same stores opened, the same buses ran, the same people returned to the same apartments. Dinner was cooked, lights turned on, curtains closed. Some people went out again, to gyms, bars, or grocery stores. Others stayed home, too tired to move, watching shows that dramatized lives far more exciting than their own. The streets grew quieter. Fewer cars passed. The glow of streetlights replaced sunlight. A night shift began for some: security guards, cleaners, hospital staff, delivery drivers. While one part of the city rested, another continued working, maintaining the illusion that the world never stopped. And in a sense, it didn't. The remarkable thing about these streets was not what happened on them, but what didn't. There were no grand turning points, no moments that felt historic, just an endless flow of ordinary actions layered on top of each other until they formed a structure so large and stable that it felt permanent. Yet, everything that would later be called history was built here, not in speeches or battles, but in routines, in people choosing where to work, where to live, what to buy, how to move, what to repeat. Economic systems were not created in boardrooms alone, but in daily purchases. Cultural shifts were not announced, but adopted quietly. New words, new habits, new technologies blending into old patterns. Social change did not arrive as a single event, but as a slow drift in how people treated each other on these very sidewalks. From a distance, history looked dramatic. From up close, it looked like commuting. The truth was simple and almost disappointing. Most of the nation's story happened without witnesses. No one recorded it because no one thought it mattered. Yet this invisible layer of life, these streets without headlines, was the real narrative. They were the place where time passed without ceremony, where generations replaced each other not through revolutions, but through aging, where the future entered quietly, disguised as convenience, efficiency, or routine. And tomorrow, the streets would do the same thing again. Shops would open, buses would run, people would go to work, not because history demanded it, but because habit did. And in that repetition, in that quiet persistence, the nation would continue writing its story, line by line, step by step, without ever stopping to read it. Every American home, no matter how different it looked from the outside, shared one invisible structure on the inside: repetition. Not the kind that felt boring or meaningless, but the kind that quietly shaped lives. The kind that turned houses into homes, days into routines, and generations into echoes of one another. In the morning, kitchens came alive first. Coffee machines hissed and clicked, Toasters glowed faintly in the half-light. Someone always forgot where they put their keys. Someone always checked the time twice, convinced they were late even when they weren't. These moments happened in apartments, farmhouses, suburban homes, and city condos alike. Different walls, different furniture, but the same sequence of movements. Parents prepared breakfast while children sat at tables, half awake, staring at screens or cereal bowls. Some families talked, others ate in silence. Radios once filled these spaces with voices from far away, bringing news, music, and advertisements into private rooms. Later, televisions replaced radios, screens replaced sound, but the posture remained the same. People gathered around a device that connected them to something beyond their walls. In the 1950s, families sat around black and white televisions, watching the same programs at the same time each evening. In the 1980s, the televisions were larger and in color, but the ritual was identical. In the 2000s, laptops and smartphones entered the living room, but the habit of collective attention remained. The technology changed, the behavior didn't. Dinner was the most repeated ritual of all. It happened every day, in every decade, in every version of the American household. Sometimes it was formal, with everyone seated at a table. Sometimes it was informal, eaten on couches or in front of screens. Sometimes it was fast food eaten from paper bags. Sometimes it was home-cooked meals passed down through generations. Recipes traveled quietly through families. A grandmother taught her daughter how to make a dish. The daughter taught her son. The ingredients shifted slightly with time. Less butter, more spices, healthier alternatives, but the emotional meaning stayed the same. Food was never just food. It was memory made edible. In one house, a father always sat in the same chair. In another, a mother always watched the same evening show. In another, children always argued about who controlled the remote. These patterns felt trivial, but over years they became identity. People did not remember every day of their lives. They remembered the structure of them. Bedrooms reflected the same quiet continuity. Beds were made and unmade, clothes piled up and disappeared. Alarm clocks rang in the same place for decades. Walls changed colors, furniture was replaced, but the function of the room remained unchanged, a private space where the body rested and time reset. Children grew up inside these routines without realizing it. They thought their families were unique, but later discovered that most households followed the same invisible script. Homework at the kitchen table, television after dinner, bedtime negotiations, weekend chores, holidays repeating in predictable patterns. Thanksgiving always meant a large meal. Christmas always meant decorations and gifts. Birthdays always meant cake. These rituals existed across class, race, and geography. They formed a shared emotional calendar that connected strangers through similar expectations. The house itself aged alongside its occupants. Paint peeled, carpets wore thin, appliances broke and were replaced, but the layout often remained the same. The kitchen stayed the kitchen, the living room stayed the living room. These spaces absorbed decades of conversations, arguments, laughter, silence, and sleep. In older homes, radios once sat on wooden shelves, their voices filling the room with distant worlds. Families gathered to listen to shows, news, and music, imagining places they would never visit. Later, televisions brought images into the room, making the outside world visible without requiring anyone to leave their chairs. The shift from radio to television felt revolutionary at the time. So did the shift from television to internet. But inside the home, the impact was subtle. People still sat, still watched, still listened. The only difference was the shape of the device and the speed of the information. In the evenings, after work and school, households settled into their familiar patterns. Some people cooked, some cleaned, some rested, some argued, some avoided each other quietly. These emotional rhythms repeated across decades. New generations believed their struggles were new, but they were often identical to those of their parents and grandparents. A teenager in the 1970s felt misunderstood. So did a teenager in the 1990s. So did a teenager in the 2020s. The language changed, the clothes changed, the music changed, but the emotional experience of growing up inside a family remained almost untouched by time. Parents worried about money, safety, education, and the future. They always had, they always would. Different crises appeared in different decades: economic recessions, cultural shifts, technological anxieties, but the emotional shape of parental concern stayed constant. At night, homes grew quieter. Televisions turned off, lights dimmed. The house breathed slowly through heating systems and electrical hums. People moved from shared spaces into private ones, carrying the weight of the day into sleep. And then the cycle repeated. What made these homes powerful was not what happened inside them, but how often it happened. Repetition created stability. Stability created identity. Identity created the feeling of belonging to something larger than oneself. History rarely entered these spaces in dramatic ways. Wars were discussed over dinner. Elections were argued about in living rooms. Economic crises were felt through unpaid bills and delayed purchases. But even during these moments, the structure of home life remained intact. People still ate, still slept, still gathered, still argued about small things, still celebrated holidays, still complained about chores. The nation could change its policies, its borders, its technology, but the internal rhythm of households remained almost unchanged. Even when families moved to new cities or states, they recreated the same routines in new spaces. The furniture changed, but the habits traveled. The house was not a building, it was a pattern of behavior. Children left home and created their own households. They believed they were starting something new, but unknowingly reproduced the same rituals, the same breakfast routines, the same television habits, the same emotional structures. The repetition continued, disguised as choice. Technology promised transformation, but delivered familiarity. Smart homes still required people to wake up, eat, work, rest, and sleep. Streaming replaced broadcasting, messages replaced phone calls, but the basic architecture of domestic life remained untouched. The home became a museum of invisible history, not the kind with artifacts and labels, but the kind with gestures and memories. The way a door was always closed, the way someone always sat in the same spot, the way voices echoed in the same rooms for decades. Generations passed through these spaces like seasons. Children became adults, adults became elders, elders faded into photographs on shelves. New children arrived and repeated the same patterns without knowing they were repeating anything at all. From the outside, history looked like progress. Inside the home, it looked like continuity. And that was the quiet truth. American life was not built on constant change, but on repeated structure. The nation evolved through millions of households performing nearly identical routines day after day, decade after decade. Homes did not produce heroes, they produced habits, and those habits multiplied across time and space created the real foundation of society. Not through dramatic events, not through major decisions, but through repetition. The economy did not arrive with an announcement. It did not declare itself, did not introduce new rules, and did not ask anyone for permission to grow. It simply expanded, quietly, through habits, routines, and decisions that felt too ordinary to be remembered. Most people never saw it happening. They only noticed that life seemed slightly different than it had been before. In the early morning, factories turned on their lights. Machines began their slow rhythm, the same rhythm they had followed for years. Workers entered through the same doors, wearing the same uniforms, clocking in at the same time. They did not think of themselves as participants in a national economic system. They thought of themselves as people going to work. Inside these factories, objects were produced in numbers too large for anyone to imagine individually. Boxes of parts, stacks of materials, finished products wrapped in plastic and loaded onto trucks. Each item had a destination, a buyer, a purpose. But no single worker ever saw the whole journey. They only saw their part of it. In another part of the country, offices replaced factories. Glass buildings filled with desks, screens, keyboards, and coffee cups. People typed, clicked, spoke into phones, attended meetings that led to more meetings. Nothing physical was created, yet value moved invisibly through networks of data and decisions. The workers in these offices did not feel wealthy. They felt tired. They felt busy. They measured their days in emails answered, deadlines met, reports submitted. The economy existed for them as salary deposits, tax deductions, rent payments, and credit card bills. Outside, supermarkets stood quietly at the center of suburban neighborhoods, their parking lots filled and emptied throughout the day. Inside, shelves remained stocked with a consistency that felt natural, even though it required massive systems of production, transportation, and coordination. People walked through aisles without thinking about where anything came from. Apples appeared in winter. Meat arrived already packaged. Bread waited in neat rows. The economy worked best when it remained invisible. The shift from small local shops to large supermarkets happened slowly. At first, it felt convenient. Later, it felt normal. Eventually, it felt inevitable. No one held a ceremony to mark the moment when the old system faded and the new one took over. Suburbs grew the same way, not through dramatic planning, but through repetition. One house was built, then another, then a street, then a school, then a shopping center. Years passed. A town appeared where fields had once existed. Families moved into these homes without thinking about urban design or economic trends. They thought about space, safety, comfort, and distance from work. But their choices collectively reshaped the physical structure of the nation. Highways connected these spaces. Cars became essential. Gas stations multiplied. Commutes lengthened. Time itself became part of the economy, measured in traffic, schedules, and efficiency. The economy expanded not through revolution, but through infrastructure. Factories slowly moved away from city centers. Offices replaced them. Warehouses appeared at the edges of towns. Distribution centers replaced storefronts. Online shopping replaced physical browsing. Each shift felt small, but together they transformed how people lived. Workers adopted without reflection. A factory worker became a service worker. A cashier became a delivery driver. A secretary became a data manager. Job titles changed, skills shifted, but the rhythm of labor remained constant. Wake up, go to work, come home, repeat. Paychecks arrived every 2 weeks. Rent was due every month. Mortgages stretched across decades. Loans financed cars, education, and furniture. Debt became a background condition, not a crisis. People did not feel like participants in economic growth. They felt like they were maintaining stability. They aimed to survive, not to expand. Yet their collective actions created steady national growth that could be measured in charts and statistics. Economic reports spoke of productivity, GDP, inflation, employment rates, but these numbers meant little to individuals. What they felt was grocery prices, gas costs, rent increases, and salary stagnation. The economy existed as pressure, not as progress. Supermarkets introduced self-checkout. Offices introduced automation. Factories introduced robotics. Each change promised efficiency, but also uncertainty. Jobs disappeared quietly. New ones appeared quietly. No single moment felt decisive. Entire industries emerged without public awareness. Tech companies grew from garages into global systems. Online platforms replaced physical services. Data became a form of currency, even though most people never saw it. Money moved digitally. Paychecks became deposits. Bills became subscriptions. Cash became optional. The economy no longer required physical exchange to function. It became abstract, existing inside screens and systems. Yet, people still worked the same hours, still felt tired, still worried about the future. The idea of economic growth suggested improvement, But daily life did not feel significantly easier. Houses became larger but more expensive. Devices became faster but more demanding. Services became more efficient but more impersonal. The economy grew, but time did not. Suburbs expanded outward, cities grew upward, rural areas shrank quietly. Small towns lost factories, then stores, then people. Big cities absorbed talent, capital, and attention. These changes did not arrive with announcements. They arrived as closures, as layoffs, as empty buildings, as new construction elsewhere. Families adapted. They always did. They moved. They retrained. They accepted lower pay. They worked longer hours. They relied on credit. They postponed retirement. The economy did not collapse. It shifted. From the inside, it felt like nothing was happening. From the outside, it was transformation. Supermarkets replaced markets. Corporations replaced local businesses. Franchises replaced independent stores. Online platforms replaced physical services. Each step removed human interaction and replaced it with systems. Yet, people barely noticed. They appreciated convenience. They valued speed. They adopted to interfaces instead of people. The economy became quieter as it grew larger. Factories produced more with fewer workers. Offices managed more data with fewer staff. Stores sold more products with fewer employees. Growth no longer required visible human labor. It required algorithms. The economy no longer needed crowds. It needed connections. Trucks drove at night. Warehouses operated without windows. Servers processed transactions without light. The real economy moved in spaces no one visited and systems no one understood. Yet, it still depended on ordinary people, on their purchases, on their subscriptions, on their attention. Economic growth became psychological. It depended on desire, not necessity, on upgrades, not survival, on trends, not needs. People bought newer versions of things they already owned: phones, cars, appliances, clothes. The old version still worked, but growth required replacement. Advertising filled the spaces between content. Marketing replaced persuasion. Consumption replaced satisfaction. The economy no longer produced objects, it produced motivation. And still it felt invisible. People did not feel richer, they felt busier. They did not feel empowered, they felt monitored. They did not feel stable, they felt adaptable. The economy no longer promised security, it promised flexibility. Jobs became temporary, careers became uncertain, education became continuous, retirement became distant. Yet none of this arrived suddenly, it arrived gradually, disguised as opportunity. The economy no one noticed growing was not built through dramatic reforms or revolutionary systems. It was built through small adjustments that felt logical at the time. A new store opened, a new service appeared, a new app simplified a task, a new policy adjusted a process. Each change felt minor. Together, they created a new world. The most powerful feature of this economy was not its size, but its subtlety. It did not force itself into awareness. It integrated itself into routine. People participated without choosing to. They contributed without realizing it. They generated data, demand, and profit simply by living. The economy became a background condition, like weather or gravity. It did not need attention. It needed compliance. And so, it grew. Not through moments that made history, not through decisions that felt important, but through millions of small, ordinary actions repeated every day by people who believed they were simply living their lives. The economy no one noticed growing was the most powerful system the nation ever created, because no one ever saw it. Technology did not arrive in American homes like a storm. It did not knock down doors or announce itself with urgency. It entered quietly, almost politely, through small changes that felt convenient rather than revolutionary. At first, people barely noticed it. Later, they could not imagine life without it. The living room was never designed to be a place of innovation. It was meant for rest, conversation, and silence. Yet over time, it became the main gateway through which technology entered everyday life. Not through factories or laboratories, but through couches, coffee tables, and quiet evenings. The first major shift was electricity. Before it, evenings were shaped by daylight and darkness. Families gathered around candles or oil lamps. Night ended earlier. Activities were limited. Silence arrived quickly. When electric lights appeared, they did not feel like a transformation. They felt like convenience. Rooms became brighter. Evenings became longer. People stayed awake without thinking about why. Electricity did not change who people were. It changed when they slept. With light came appliances. Refrigerators replaced ice boxes, stoves replaced fire, fans replaced open windows. Each device solved a small problem. None of them felt historic, but together they redefined domestic life. The refrigerator meant fewer trips to the market. Food lasted longer. Leftovers became normal. Shopping shifted from daily to weekly. Diets changed. Storage changed. But no one wrote about it as a cultural shift. It was just easier. Then came the radio. At first, it felt magical, a wooden box that could bring voices from far away into the living room. Families gathered around it in silence, listening to music, news, and stories. The radio created a shared national sound. People heard the same songs, the same announcers, the same jokes. The country became synchronized emotionally. But after a few years, the magic faded. The radio became furniture. It played in the background. It filled silence. It became part of the room, not the center of it. Then came television. The television did not replace the radio immediately. It sat beside it. It felt unnecessary at first. Black and white images flickered on small screens. Programs were limited. The quality was low, but the presence was powerful. For the first time, families did not just hear the world, they saw it. The living room reorganized itself around the screen. Furniture shifted direction, chairs faced forward, lights dimmed, attention became focused. Silence returned, but this time it was directed toward moving images. Television did not change conversations, it replaced them. Dinner schedules adjusted to broadcast times. Evenings became structured around shows. Children learned to recognize characters before reading books. News became visual. Reality became framed. Yet no one felt like they were witnessing a revolution. They felt entertained. Television became routine. It stayed on even when no one was watching. It filled the room with light and sound. It became a presence rather than an event. Then came the computer. At first, it did not belong in the living room. It felt like an office tool, a machine for work, not for family. It sat on desks in bedrooms or spare rooms. It made noise. It felt complicated. Early computers required attention. They demanded commands, patience, and learning. They did not replace television. They did not replace radio. They existed in parallel, serving different purposes. But slowly, they moved closer. Laptops appeared, smaller screens, less noise, wireless connections. The computer left the desk and entered the living room. It sat on couches, coffee tables, laps. The screen became personal. Unlike television, it did not belong to everyone. It belonged to one person at a time. Attention fragmented. People sat together but looked at different worlds. Then came the internet. At first, it felt slow. Pages loaded gradually. Sounds signaled connection. The internet was something you entered, not something that existed constantly. You logged in, you logged out. But over time, it stopped being a place and became a condition. The internet did not replace television, it absorbed it. Shows became streams, news became feeds, conversations became messages, photos became posts. The living room no longer had one screen. It had many. Phones appeared, tablets, smart TVs, speakers, watches. Screens multiplied quietly.
Each one promised convenience, each one reduced friction, each one felt optional. Together, they changed everything. The living room became connected to the entire world at all times. Silence disappeared, waiting disappeared, boredom disappeared, but so did attention, presence, and stillness. People no longer gathered around one device, they gathered around many, separately. A family could sit on the same couch while living in different digital realities. One person watched a show, another scrolled through news, another played a game, another checked messages. Physical proximity no longer meant shared experience. Technology did not isolate people suddenly, it separated them gently. Electricity extended time, television focused attention, computers personalized experience, the internet dissolved boundaries. None of this felt dramatic while it was happening. Each step felt logical, each device solved a problem, each update improved efficiency, each platform offered connection. No one asked whether anything was being lost. The living room did not resist, it adapted. Cables appeared, then disappeared. Remotes multiplied, then disappeared. Voice commands replaced buttons. Devices responded to names. The room learned to listen. Smart speakers entered the home. They answered questions, played music, controlled lights, set reminders. They did not feel like machines, they felt like assistants. Technology became invisible. The most powerful change was not what technology did, but how it disappeared into routine. People stopped noticing it. They stopped remembering life before it. Children born into this world never experienced silence without stimulation. They never waited for information. They never wondered what was happening elsewhere. Everything was always available, but nothing felt special. The living room was no longer a place of rest. It was a portal. Work entered the home. Emails arrived at night. Meetings happened on couches. Offices dissolved into screens. Entertainment became endless. There was always something to watch, listen to, or play. Choice became overwhelming. Satisfaction became rare. Technology promised connection. It delivered access. People knew more. They remembered less. The room filled with content, but lost memory. Photographs no longer lived on walls. They lived in clouds. Music no longer lived on shelves. It lived in algorithms. Conversations no longer lived in moments. They lived in archives. The living room became a storage space for experiences that were never fully experienced. Technology did not make life faster. It made it denser. More information, more choices, more voices, more updates. Less silence, less patience, less attention. Yet no one asked it to stop, because technology never felt like intrusion. It felt like improvement. Electricity made nights brighter. Television made evenings entertaining. Computers made work easier. The internet made everything accessible. Each step was small. Each change was gentle. Each device arrived as a solution. By the time anyone realized how much had changed, it was already normal. The living room had transformed from a place of shared presence into a networked environment of individual attention. But it still looked the same. Couches, tables, lamps, rugs. The difference was invisible. Technology had not changed the room. It had changed the people inside it. They sat closer to the world, but further from each other. They knew more, but felt less. They were connected constantly, but rarely fully present. And still, it did not feel like history. It felt like convenience. That was the quiet power of technology entering the living room. It did not demand adaptation, it invited it. It did not disrupt life, it blended into it. Not as a revolution, not as a turning point, but as background. And in that background, the entire structure of everyday life, slowly, gently, permanently changed.
Politics was always there, but rarely in the room. It lived in the background, like a radio left playing in another part of the house. Its voices drifted through kitchens and living rooms, carried by broadcasters who spoke with urgency. But for most people, those voices blended into the rhythm of the day. They were heard, but not absorbed, not fully. In the morning, the news came through routine. A television turned on while coffee brewed, a radio murmured from the countertop. A newspaper lay folded beside a plate. Headlines spoke of debates, votes, crises, negotiations. Words like policy, budget, election, and reform floated through the air. But breakfast still had to be eaten. Children still needed to get ready for school. Work still started at the same hour. The voice on the radio might say that a new law was being proposed. The newspaper might report on a disagreement in Washington. The television might show a press conference filled with microphones and flags. Yet in the kitchen, someone asked where their shoes were. Politics moved at a scale larger than daily life. It dealt in systems and strategies, in statistics and speeches. It spoke in a language that felt official, distant, sometimes abstract. Meanwhile, daily life operated on practical needs: groceries, bills, deadlines, appointments. The distance between those two worlds was rarely acknowledged. It was simply accepted. In small towns, local politics appeared more visible. There were city council meetings, school board decisions, community votes, flyers posted on bulletin boards, yard signs planted during election seasons. But even then, most people engaged with politics lightly. They knew the names of candidates, they had general opinions, they might attend a meeting once or twice, but they still went to work the next morning. In cities, politics felt even more abstract. Government buildings stood downtown, guarded and formal. Inside, decisions were made that affected millions. Outside, pedestrians hurried past, focused on catching buses or finishing errands. Politics was important, everyone agreed, but it was rarely urgent in the moment. During election years, the noise grew louder. Advertisements interrupted television shows, mailboxes filled with campaign flyers, phone calls came during dinner, social media timelines filled with arguments. For a brief period, politics moved closer to the surface. People discussed it at work, debated it at family gatherings, argued about it online. And then the election ended. The yard signs disappeared, the advertisements stopped, the radio voices returned to their steady tone. Life resumed its previous rhythm. A factory worker listened to news updates during his commute, nodding occasionally, disagreeing silently. But once he entered the building, the machines were louder than the commentary. Production schedules mattered more than legislative proposals. A teacher glanced at headlines during lunch break. They were debates about education funding, curriculum standards, national priorities. But in her classroom, she still had to manage 30 students and finish the lesson plan. A small business owner heard about new tax policies while driving to open his store. He absorbed the information, considered it briefly, then unlocked the door and greeted his first customer. Politics was a layer on top of life, not the center of it. Even during moments of national tension, when the news cycle intensified, daily routines persisted. People still needed to cook dinner, still needed to pay rent, still needed to get enough sleep to function the next day. The headlines could feel dramatic, even alarming. Words like historic, unprecedented, and crisis appeared frequently, but from inside the average household, change felt slower. New policies took time to implement, economic effects unfolded gradually, social shifts evolved over years, not days. The urgency of political language rarely matched the pace of everyday experience. In earlier decades, politics arrived through newspapers and evening broadcasts. Families gathered around televisions at scheduled times to watch the news. The anchor's voice carried authority. Events felt important but distant. Later, cable news channels filled entire days with commentary. Panels debated continuously. Opinions multiplied. The noise increased. Then came the internet. Politics moved from scheduled broadcasts to constant presence. News alerts appeared on phones. Social media amplified reactions. Every statement became content. Every decision became discussion. Politics became louder than ever before. And yet, for many, it remained background noise. A person could scroll past political posts without stopping, could mute conversations, could turn off notifications, could avoid certain channels.
The choice to engage or ignore became personal. Some people became deeply involved. They followed every update, every debate, every vote. They organized, protested, campaigned. But many others kept politics at a distance, not because they didn't care, but because they were tired. Daily life required attention. Work demanded energy. Family needed presence. There were only so many hours in a day. Politics felt like a performance happening elsewhere. Even when policies affected individuals directly, through healthcare costs, taxes, education, employment, the connection was rarely immediate. It came through paperwork, forms, notices in the mail. The impact was administrative, not dramatic. A letter arrived explaining a change, a bill increased slightly, a benefit was adjusted, a requirement shifted. Life continued. At dinner tables, political conversations varied. Some families avoided the topic entirely, sensing its potential to divide. Others debated passionately, voices rising and falling with emotion. But even the most intense argument usually ended with someone clearing the dishes. Politics could disrupt conversation. It rarely disrupted routine. Generations experienced politics differently. Older Americans remembered listening to radio addresses, watching major speeches on television. They recalled specific moments, announcements, crises, celebrations. Younger generations experienced politics as a continuous feed. There was no clear beginning or end. It was always present, always updating. Yet both groups shared a common reality. Daily life persisted. A national debate might dominate headlines for weeks. Commentators would predict lasting consequences. Analysts would discuss historical significance. Meanwhile, children went to school, workers clocked in, stores opened and closed. Politics shaped laws and systems. It influenced budgets and regulations. It defined rights and responsibilities. But it did not wake people up in the morning. Alarm clocks did. It did not feed families at night. Kitchens did. It did not create habits. Routine did. The truth was that politics wasn't important. It was often indirect. It operated at a structural level, while daily life operated at a personal one. Occasionally, the two collided dramatically. Major events forced politics into immediate awareness. Protests filled streets. Decisions sparked visible reactions. But even those moments eventually settled into memory. The streets cleared, the news cycle shifted, the voices on television moved to the next topic. Politics returned to the background, and there it remained, steady, persistent, often loud, but rarely central to the rhythm of ordinary existence. The average citizen developed a kind of selective listening, enough attention to stay informed, enough distance to stay sane. They voted, they complained, they hoped, they worried, and then they went to work. Politics was the soundtrack, not the scene. It framed the narrative of the nation. It influenced the direction of policies. It created the structure within which society operated. But it did not replace the small, repeated actions that defined daily life. In the end, politics existed like distant thunder, sometimes closer, sometimes louder, occasionally frightening, but often far away. And inside homes, on quiet streets, in offices and classrooms, life continued. Not indifferent, not unaware, but focused elsewhere. Because for most people, history was not written in speeches or votes. It was written in routine. And politics, no matter how loud, remained part of the background noise.
Culture did not ask for attention. It did not wait for permission, nor did it announce its arrival with ceremony. It formed quietly, in the spaces between routine and rest, in the ordinary hours when people were not trying to make history. It emerged from kitchens, sidewalks, school hallways, radio stations, and living rooms, shaped not by grand design, but by repetition. No one decided what American culture would be. It assembled itself slowly from countless small choices. A song played on the radio, and someone hummed along. A jacket worn by a movie star appeared in storefront windows weeks later. A new word slipped into conversation, then into classrooms, then into advertisements. These changes felt casual, They were never planned. Yet over time, they became identity. Music was often the first signal of change. In one decade, families gathered around radios listening to big band orchestras. In another, teenagers turned the dial towards something louder, faster, more personal. Parents frowned. Children felt understood. The cycle repeated itself across generations. The songs themselves were not political declarations or cultural manifestos. They were expressions of mood, joy, heartbreak, rebellion, longing. But they carried something deeper. They carried atmosphere. A melody heard in high school could remain in memory for 50 years. A lyric learned casually could become a personal motto. Music traveled easily, crossing state lines and social boundaries. It united strangers who had never met but knew the same chorus. At record stores, vinyl albums lined shelves in neat rows. Later, cassette tapes replaced them, then compact discs, then invisible files streamed through the air. The format changed, but the habit remained. Someone pressing play and listening alone or together. Culture grew in bedrooms where teenagers listened to songs on headphones, imagining lives beyond their neighborhoods. It grew in cars where friends sang loudly with the windows down. It grew in dance halls, stadiums, and small bars where local bands played for small crowds. None of these moments felt historic. They felt fun, temporary, personal. Fashion followed a similar path. A style appeared in one city, perhaps on a college campus, perhaps in a music video. It spread through magazines and store windows. Soon it appeared in malls across the country. Jeans grew wider, then narrower. Hair grew longer, then shorter. Colors changed, patterns shifted, accessories came and went. Clothing did not simply cover bodies, it signaled belonging. A leather jacket meant something different in the 1950s than in the 1980s. Sneakers once meant sports. Later, they meant status. Suits once meant authority. Later, they meant tradition. Yet no committee decided these meanings. They emerged through repetition. A group of friends dressed similarly. A photograph captured it. Others copied it. Retailers noticed. Manufacturers adjusted. What began as a choice became a trend. What became a trend became a norm. Slang developed even more quietly. A word spoken casually in a classroom might sound unusual at first. A few students repeat it. It spreads through hallways, then through schools, then through cities. Eventually, it appears in movies, on television, in advertisements. By the time older generations notice it, the word already feels natural to younger ones. Language shifts subtly, reflecting mood and environment. Some words disappear, others evolve. Phrases once considered rebellious become ordinary. Slang is rarely recorded in official documents, yet it often captures the emotional tone of a generation more accurately than any speech. Movies played a different role. In dark theaters, strangers sat side by side watching stories projected onto large screens. The characters lived dramatic lives: heroes, villains, dreamers, outsiders. Audiences absorbed not only the plot, but the style, the way characters spoke, the way they dressed, the way they moved. After leaving the theater, people carried pieces of those stories with them. A hairstyle copied from an actress, a catchphrase repeated at school, a sense of possibility borrowed from a fictional world. Cinema did not tell people who they were, it offered suggestions. Television later brought that influence into the home. Sitcom families resembled real families just enough to feel relatable. Teen dramas mirrored real anxieties. Reality shows blurred performance and authenticity. The line between entertainment and life softened. Habits formed in the smallest details. The way people greeted each other, the way they celebrated birthdays, the way they organized their weekends. Barbecues in backyards, road trips during summer, football games on Sundays. These traditions were not declared as cultural milestones, they were simply repeated until they felt inevitable. Restaurants introduced new cuisines. At first, unfamiliar flavors seemed exotic. Over time, they became ordinary. Pizza once felt foreign.
Tacos once felt regional. Eventually, they became national. Food traveled faster than speeches. Technology accelerated the spread of culture, but did not create it. Radio allowed songs to reach distant towns. Television spread fashion instantly. The internet compressed time even further. A trend could begin in one neighborhood and reach the entire country within days. Yet, even with this speed, the mechanism remained the same: repetition. A dance shared online is copied. A phrase goes viral. A style becomes popular. Then gradually it fades. Culture is not static. It breathes. It expands and contracts. It borrows and reinvents. It remembers and forgets. Often, the most significant shifts are the least dramatic. A new kind of humor appears, more ironic, more self-aware. A new kind of confidence develops, quieter, more individual. A new kind of community forms, digital rather than physical. From the inside, these shifts feel natural. No one wakes up and says, "Today, culture has changed." They wake up, dress, speak, listen, watch, eat, laugh. And in doing so, they reshape the atmosphere of the nation. Generations become recognizable not by official events, but by mood. One generation feels hopeful and optimistic. Another feels skeptical and reflective. Another feels restless and innovative. These feelings are not written into law. They appear in music lyrics, clothing choices, and conversation patterns. Culture formed while no one was watching because people were busy living, busy studying, busy working, busy falling in love, busy raising children, busy trying to understand themselves. A teenager writing in a diary did not think they were contributing to national identity. A musician practicing in a garage did not think they were influencing fashion. A group of friends inventing inside jokes did not think they were shaping language. Yet culture absorbs all of it. It collects fragments of ordinary life and rearranges them into something shared. The most powerful cultural shifts often began at the margins. A small music scene in one city becomes a national genre. A style adopted by a minority group becomes mainstream. A phrase born in a specific community becomes universal. These transitions happen gradually, often without recognition. By the time commentators analyze a cultural movement, it has already evolved. American culture did not form through a single narrative. It formed through overlap. Country music alongside hip-hop, Western fashion alongside streetwear, Hollywood blockbusters alongside independent films, regional accents blending through migration. Contradictions coexisted. This coexistence created texture. The culture that formed while no one was watching was not unified or simple. It was layered, diverse, and constantly shifting. But it shared a rhythm, the rhythm of repetition. Listening to music while driving, watching movies on weekends, shopping for clothes before school starts, learning new slang from friends, celebrating holidays with variations. These rituals created continuity even as styles changed. The outside world might describe cultural eras with labels, decades defined by trends, movements defined by aesthetics.
Time rarely announces itself inside a family. It does not knock on the door or ask to be noticed. It moves quietly, like weather shifting outside a window. One day, a child needs help tying their shoes. Another day, that same child is taller than the parent who once bent down to assist. The change feels sudden only in memory. In reality, it happened gradually, almost invisibly. Children begin as small presences in large rooms, cribs placed beside beds, toys scattered across living room floors, nightlights glowing softly in dark hallways. Their lives are measured in firsts, first steps, first words, first days of school. Each milestone feels monumental at the time, worthy of photographs and phone calls to relatives. But after the celebration, routine returns. The baby becomes a toddler. The toddler becomes a child. The child becomes a teenager. No ceremony marks these transitions clearly enough. There is no official day when dependence turns into independence. It shifts slowly, like the angle of sunlight across the seasons. Parents age in quieter ways. At first, they are defined by energy. Early mornings, late nights, constant movement. Their bodies respond quickly, their patience stretches wide. They carry children on their shoulders, lift groceries with ease, fix broken things without hesitation. Years pass and the movements grow slower. Knees ache slightly when standing. Eyes squint at small print. The energy remains, but it requires more rest between efforts. Children rarely notice this shift at first. To them, parents seem permanent, unchanging. Grandparents exist in a different rhythm. They move more carefully, speak more slowly, repeat stories without realizing it. Their homes feel like time capsules, furniture that has not changed in decades, photographs arranged in frames, drawers filled with letters and receipts from another era. For children, grandparents represent stability. For adults, they represent memory. The passing of generations does not feel dramatic most of the time. It feels ordinary. Family gatherings illustrate this best. At holiday dinners, children sit at smaller tables. Adults occupy the center. Grandparents sit slightly apart, watching more than speaking. Conversations overlap. Laughter rises and falls. Someone clears dishes. Someone turns on the television in the background. Photographs are taken. Years later, those photographs reveal what no one noticed at the time. Hair turning gray, faces softening, children growing taller, elders leaning more heavily on chairs. Seasons move through families the way they move through landscapes. Spring is childhood, full of growth, energy, discovery. Summer is adulthood, busy, productive, warm with responsibility. Autumn is later life, reflective, steady, preparing for stillness. Winter arrives quietly. Yet, inside a family, all seasons exist at once. A toddler learning to walk while a grandfather walks with a cane. A teenager dreaming of the future while a grandmother remembers the past. A middle-aged parent standing between them, balancing forward and backward at the same time. Time moves gently, but it never stops. Children who once needed bedtime stories begin closing their bedroom doors. Their voices deepen, their opinions strengthen. They leave the house more often. Eventually, they leave entirely. The room they occupied remains, but emptier. Parents experience this shift differently. For children, leaving feels like expansion. For parents, it feels like subtraction. The house grows quieter. Grandparents fade in ways that are both subtle and undeniable. A phone call becomes shorter. A visit becomes less frequent. A familiar voice sounds thinner, softer. Medical appointments increase. Conversations revolve around health. No one declares that a chapter is ending, it simply narrows. When a grandparent passes away, the absence feels larger than their physical presence ever did. Their chair remains empty. Their voice exists only in memory. Their belongings become objects to sort through. Family members gather, speak softly, tell stories. And then life continues. Children still need to go to school. Adults still need to work. Bills still need to be paid. Grief blends into routine. The most profound transitions rarely interrupt daily structure for long. A child graduates from high school. There is a ceremony, applause, photographs. But the next morning, breakfast still happens. The dog still needs to be fed. A couple celebrates a milestone anniversary. There are speeches, laughter, perhaps a toast. But the next week, laundry still needs folding. Generations pass without grand acknowledgement because life insists on continuity. Children who once played on living room floors grow into adults who rearrange the same furniture. They inherit not just objects, but habits. The way their parents handled conflict, the way holidays were celebrated, the way mornings began. Even when individuals try to break patterns, they often carry fragments forward. A mother who swore she would never repeat her own childhood routines finds herself saying the same phrases. A father who promised to raise his children differently recognizes familiar reactions. Repetition is not deliberate, it is inherited.
Time shapes bodies visibly and relationships invisibly. A son begins to resemble his father. A daughter laughs like her mother. Gestures echo across decades. Old photographs capture these reflections. A wedding photo from 30 years ago resembles a graduation photo taken today. Faces align, expressions repeat. The passing of generations is not marked by revolution, but by resemblance. Family homes illustrate this passage clearly. At first, they are filled with noise, children running, toys clattering, doors slamming. Later, the same rooms hold quieter sounds, television murmurs, measured footsteps, ticking clocks. Eventually, the house stands almost silent. New families move in. The walls are repainted, furniture is replaced, but echoes remain. Time leaves traces and scratches on floors, and nail holes behind paintings, and the height marks penciled on door frames. Families measure growth in inches and memories. Birthdays provide a structured reminder of passing years. Candles increase, wishes remain similar. Children wish for toys. Teenagers wish for freedom. Adults wish for stability. Elders wish for health. The content changes slightly, the desire remains constant. Even arguments evolve with time. Young siblings argue over toys. Teenagers argue over rules. Adults argue over responsibility. Older relatives argue over memories. Conflict does not disappear, it matures. Love matures as well. Young couples begin with intensity, late-night conversations, shared dreams. Years later, love appears as quiet partnership, shared chores, silent understanding, familiar routines. The passion of youth transforms into the steadiness of companionship. Children observe this transformation without fully understanding it. They see aging not as loss, but as normal. Wrinkles are just part of faces. Slower steps are just how grandparents walk. Only when they reach adulthood do they recognize the fragility of those seasons. The gentle movement of time becomes clearer in hindsight. An adult visiting their childhood home notices how small it feels. The ceilings lower, the rooms shrink, the past seems condensed. Parents appear older, grandparents seem more fragile. The realization comes quietly. The seasons have shifted. Yet, even with awareness, time continues its steady pace. New children are born, new routines form, new photographs are taken. The cycle does not end, it overlaps. One generation fades while another rises. There is rarely a clear dividing line, no official moment when one era ends and another begins. It happens through birthdays, graduations, weddings, funerals, through small, repeated acts of living. Generations pass like seasons because they share the same qualities: gradual change, subtle shifts, predictable return. Spring always follows winter. Children always follow elders. The rhythm feels eternal. Inside each family, the story feels unique, but across the nation, millions of families experience the same pattern simultaneously. Children growing up, adults aging, grandparents fading. Time moves gently, without ceremony. It does not demand applause. It does not require acknowledgement. It simply continues. And within that continuity, families adapt. They remember those who came before. They teach those who come after. They pass down recipes, stories, habits, photographs. They do not control the seasons. They live inside them. The passing of generations is not dramatic. It is constant. And perhaps that is what makes it powerful. Not the sudden moments of change, but the quiet accumulation of them, like leaves falling unnoticed until the ground is covered, like sunlight shifting slowly across a room, like a child growing taller without realizing it. Time moves gently through families, and before anyone thinks to measure it, another season has already begun.